Here we are checking out probably one of the most beloved horror games of all time, this time remade with the power of modern game engine technology. I'm a bit stuffy and a bit under the weather at the moment, but no way in hell would I miss an opportunity to cover this while the iron's still hot. I'd be lying if I said I'd ever touched the original RE4 when it hit store shelves back in January of 2005. I'd have been about 11 years old, and while 11-year-old me probably wouldn't have been all that spooked by the contents of RE4, that argument probably would not have had much sway at home. So suffice it to say, it's been kind of fun to view this remake from the perspective of a new player who's only ever had a passing understanding of the story and the gameplay. If you've played the previous Resident Evil remakes over the past few years, you've already been familiar with the visual style and more action-heavy emphasis, so I won't beat you over the head about that here. The graphics here are really solid, and the performance remained consistently high throughout my time playing so far. Currently, as of recording, I've finished up to Chapter 6 out of the, I believe, 16 total chapters. I'm not going to give away any major story spoilers here, but this definitely is a typical Resident Evil story, swinging back and forth between campy, over-the-top B-movie nonsense and legit, scary, tense moments that will have you right on the edge of your seat. One of my biggest gripes with a few of the recent Resident Evil remakes is that the puzzle solving and backtracking was a bit tedious at times. I'm mostly referring to the first two remakes. Resident Evil 3's remake was a bit better about both of these, but its incredibly short, condensed completion time compared to the original makes it a difficult game to praise. Resident Evil 4's puzzles, though, I had no trouble completing. I never once felt like I had to stop to look up some tutorial online just to get past a certain dumb place the statues in order type puzzle. If you pay attention to the instructions given, everything kinda just clicks right into place. At least that was my experience. I'm not one for puzzles, if you've not been able to pick that up already. In a horror game, they just, to me, seem singularly out of place, but here it was at least tolerable, so that's something. Combat is a really key focus of RE4, and it's something that the game does really well. Learning to juggle between your available arsenal will be a determining factor in whether you live or die at any particular moment, as even with a few upgrades installed, your reload time is not going to be particularly quick, and the default base loading speed without upgrades is almost agonizingly slow if you're actively in combat at the time. While like I said, you can mitigate this over time, your main go-to tactic is going to be swapping back and forth between your primary and secondary weapons, occasionally relying on a flashbang or a grenade to clear out close-knit groups of enemies. I didn't find grenades all that useful, to be honest. The handful of times I tried them out, they just never really had that impact that a grenade I felt should. So I ended up just saving them up and then selling them whenever I happened to stop by the merchant. The inventory he offers isn't all that great for the most part, unless you're exclusively in the market for new weapons or upgrades for your existing weapons. I kinda wish they downplayed how many weapons he offers to you at any given time, and instead upped his stores of purchasable resources. There are times when I'd much rather buy ammo crafting resources as opposed to a bazooka or whatever else he's got on display. I don't want to make it seem as if you can't get a decent amount of resources by simply just looting around, because of course that's the main way you actually go about getting those things normally. The game is fairly generous when it wants to be. If you manage your ammo supply and inventory properly, you should never be without at least a few bullets to spare. But there will be definitely moments where, during or after a big set-piece sequence especially, you might find yourself down to the last clip. Those spectacle set pieces are usually among the best moments the game has to offer. Once you accept how stupid they are in a Batman and Robin kind of way, you can just disengage your brain and appreciate the fun factor. Some of the boss fights do tend to drag out a bit and are somewhat unnecessarily repetitive, but not to the point where it drags down the game too much. I'd be lying if I said I cared much about the story, and to be honest, I don't feel like the game does either. We're given a short montage at the start, which acts as a decent recap for the events of the past two remakes, but then at blazing speed it bowls through the setup of this game, conveying in a few seconds what would normally be spread out over several cutscenes. And the rest of the game acts as if you should just fill in the blanks. When was the president's daughter kidnapped? We don't know. How come the Secret Service shit the bed at protecting her? We don't know. Why does the president pick us, one lone guy, as opposed to activating an entire task force? We don't know. How did Leon know where to start looking? Again, we don't know. I'm normally willing to suspend some disbelief in cases like this, where you very clearly have an action-driven plot, but if you're going to throw so many big plot points at the player very early into the game, you cannot afford to have equally huge plot holes. And an easy counter-argument might be, well, the game will explain over time, except, no. If the game isn't going to bother setting the stuff up over time, and instead bombards you all at once, then clarifies nothing, even several hours in, then that just screams bad storytelling to me. If you're not capable of delivering a large-scale story without this many plot holes, just narrow the focus and tell something simpler. There's nothing wrong with that. If the first John Wick movie can get away with something as simple as Doug stealing his car and shooting his dog, then Resident Evil 4 can definitely afford to offload some of the bloat. The level design and art direction here do a good job of making each area of the map stand out as being different than the others. You never get that sense of being in a samey type area, where you can just tell the assets have been flagrantly copy-pasted without any attempt to hide it. You know, like the typical Ubisoft game. There's lots of treasure, lore, and many other collectibles hidden around in both obvious and obscure places. There's a lot of incentive to really roam around and check every corner for a breakable box or an interactable puzzle. Certainly a lot more tempting than finding Riddler puzzles all over Gotham City. It's worth noting that the controls on PC aren't exactly ideal. Capcom has always been a bit bad when it comes to how they implement their keybinds and other such controls. When you first boot up the game, you have to agree to the terms of service, which is a very standard operating thing. You then tweak your brightness settings, etc., and the only way to control this interface is via the page up and page down keyboard keys, which is extremely strange. To the best of my memory, Capcom's the only publisher I've ever encountered that's insisted on page up and down as menu navigation keys, and their reliance on spacebar instead of enter as a confirmation key, while less tedious, still seems kind of ass backwards to me, compared to what the rest of the industry does. I'm assuming this is because Capcom develops the Resident Evil games primarily for consoles, with the PC port being something of an afterthought on their part. Because I refuse to believe a PC-oriented development process from a developer who is intimately familiar with how PC players engage with said games would implement things this way. It just doesn't add up in my mind. Overall, I'm quite happy so far with what Resident Evil 4 has to offer. While I still have more than half the game to go, I'm definitely enjoying the experience so far. Yeah, I still have my obvious nitpicks. It's far from a perfect game, but it's still really, really good. And I don't hesitate in saying if you're a Resident Evil fan or just a casual player looking for some good campy horror action fun, Resident Evil 4 Remake will probably scratch your itch. Thanks to Capcom for providing a review copy ahead of the game's official launch. I now leave you so I can return to my villager killing mayhem, thus restoring order to the universe. Peace through violence is after all the only appropriate solution. If you like what I do, subscribing would be pretty nice. I enjoy reviewing stuff and doing casual gaming content, so odds are if you like this video, there's others here that might be to your liking. This is Warrior Dan signing out. Stay awesome, everybody. Stay safe and peace out.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?